The first moment their paths cross, there's an unspoken tension humming beneath the surface, the kind that builds not from loud conflict, but from the simple friction of two very different energies colliding. On one side stands someone whose confidence isn't loud, forced, or inflated. It's steady, measured, and earned through experience and character. On the other stands the figure who has long mistaken arrogance for strength, the person who walks through life believing nothing and no one can challenge them. This imbalance, earned confidence versus hollow superiority, creates a natural spark that viewers instinctively recognize. It's the foundation of countless real and fictional confrontations because it taps into something universally understood: authenticity versus ego. When arrogance steps onto the scene, it often tries to dominate. It speaks over others, dismisses quiet strength, and assumes the world will fold beneath its weight. Yet there is something powerful, almost magnetic, about watching someone with quiet conviction refuse to cower or conform. Their restraint becomes a statement, their poise a kind of pressure that arrogance doesn't know how to process. What begins as a clash of personalities quickly turns into an emotional tug-of-war, where every word, glance, or shift carries deeper meaning. As arrogance pushes harder, trying to assert superiority, quiet confidence simply holds its ground, speaking less yet saying more with each subtle reaction. This creates an atmosphere thick with anticipation, as though the air itself is waiting for the moment when the dynamic flips. Viewers lean in, sensing the undercurrent that arrogance hasn't yet noticed, the unspoken truth that confidence built on integrity always outlasts bluster built on ego. The beauty of this keynote lies not in loud drama, but in the simmering tension that slowly rises, the kind that comes from watching someone who has coasted through life on attitude alone finally meet someone they cannot intimidate. It is in the small moments, a steady gaze, a controlled breath, a calm refusal to be belittled. These moments plant the seeds for the takedown that audiences crave. They see the arrogance beginning to wobble, even if the arrogant character doesn't realize it yet. What was once a swagger begins to feel forced. What was once certainty begins to resemble overcompensation. And beneath it all, viewers feel the emotional pulse building toward the moment when the facade finally cracks. Tension thickens as subtle deceit begins unraveling under pressure. At first, the deceit is smooth, almost invisible, delivered with the ease of someone who's gotten away with manipulation for far too long. The arrogant character leans on practiced lines, confident smirks, and carefully curated lies that have served them well in every previous encounter. But this time, something is different. Maybe it's the situation, maybe it's the person standing before them, or maybe it's the slight shift in the environment that makes deception feel suddenly fragile. Whatever the trigger, it becomes clear that the foundation under their feet isn't as solid as they believed. Each lie they speak carries a faint tremor, a tiny hesitation that viewers catch even before other characters do. And with every subtle misstep, pressure begins to mount. Deceit doesn't unravel in one dramatic moment, it frays. It starts with inconsistencies that seem small but grow louder as tension rises. It might be a detail repeated incorrectly, a claim that contradicts an earlier remark, or a moment where their confidence slips and the truth peeks through. Watching this unraveling creates a unique kind of suspense, the slow burn variety that draws viewers deeper into the emotional landscape of the scene. They sense the deceiver scrambling, patching holes faster than they appear, trying desperately to maintain control even as control slips away. Their eyes move too quickly, their voice tightens at the edges. Arrogance gives way to agitation, and agitation gives way to silent panic. The tension amplifies, because deceit thrives only in calm environments. The moment pressure enters the room, it becomes unstable. Someone with quiet confidence, someone who refuses to be intimidated, becomes the perfect catalyst for exposing the cracks. Their unshakable presence acts like a mirror the deceiver cannot escape, reflecting back every flaw, every discrepancy, every ounce of guilt they hoped to hide. Viewers love this part of the story because it mirrors real-life dynamics. Dishonesty may flourish temporarily, but under the spotlight of integrity and pressure, it always starts to decay. The unraveling becomes almost poetic. What once seemed like a seamless performance dissolves into jagged pieces that can't be hidden anymore. And woven through every second is that rising emotional intensity. The thrill of watching someone who built their world on manipulation slowly suffocate under the weight of their own lies. There is a distinct shift in energy the moment someone decides they will not shrink, bend, or be shaken by the presence of arrogance or deceit. It's not a loud declaration, not an aggressive stance, but a calm and powerful decision to stand firm in the truth. This bold truth-teller may not raise their voice or posture themselves as a warrior, yet the strength they carry radiates through every breath, every word, and every measured silence. Their stillness becomes its own kind of force, one that the arrogant antagonist can't easily read or control. This refusal to be intimidated begins subtly at first, a steady gaze that doesn't dart away, a voice that doesn't tremble even when challenged, a posture that doesn't collapse under pressure. These small, almost invisible signs accumulate until the atmosphere tightens around them, amplifying the growing imbalance between calm integrity and desperate manipulation. Viewers feel this shift immediately. It resonates with a deep emotional truth. There is something incredibly compelling about watching someone grounded in honesty push back against someone who relies on pressure and dominance. It stirs feelings of hope, justice, and personal empowerment. As the bold truth-teller continues to hold firm, the antagonist grows increasingly irritated. Arrogance expects compliance. Deceit expects fear. But when neither appears, the deceiver begins to lose their usual rhythm. Their tone sharpens, their words become more forceful yet less effective. The more they try to control the situation, the more obvious it becomes that control is slipping through their fingers. The truth-teller, meanwhile, does not flinch. Their strength isn't loud, it's resolute. They speak clearly, choosing their words with purpose. Instead of matching aggression with aggression, they allow the truth to do the work. Every fact they reveal, every inconsistency they point out, adds weight to their stance and pressure to their opponent. This is the moment where viewers feel the suspense peak, not because of physical danger but because of emotional confrontation. They sense the unraveling begin. They recognize that truth, when delivered without fear, has an undeniable impact. They see the arrogant figure react with confusion, annoyance, disbelief, emotions that signal their certainty is cracking. The truth-teller becomes a presence the antagonist can no longer ignore or belittle, and this shift destabilizes the entire dynamic. What once felt like an uneven field becomes balanced and then begins to tilt in the truth-teller's favor. It is the embodiment of quiet resilience overpowering loud dominance. As tension escalates, viewers become deeply invested, waiting for the moment when the truth lands with undeniable force, pushing the story toward its inevitable turning point. What makes this keynote so emotionally potent is the transformation happening in real time. The boldness of standing in truth becomes a catalyst that reshapes the entire narrative, forcing arrogance and deceit into a losing battle they can no longer disguise with confidence or charm. The turning point erupts when greed exposes its own weakness. Greed carries with it a unique kind of blindness. It convinces the one who holds it that they deserve more, that they cannot be caught, that their actions are justified by their desires. It pushes them to take risks they would never take otherwise, to speak too quickly, to reach too far, to make choices that ultimately betray their intentions. And it's within this blind overreach that the story finds its most electrifying turning point. When greed begins to expose its own weakness, it doesn't happen all at once. It reveals itself through small cracks that widen with every decision the antagonist makes. Perhaps they add unnecessary details to their lies, trying to sound convincing. Perhaps they push others for information or control, unaware that they're drawing attention to themselves. Maybe they underestimate the intelligence or patience of those around them. Greed clouds judgment, and when someone is driven by it, they start to reveal their vulnerabilities without realizing it. This turning point becomes emotionally gripping because viewers recognize the inevitability of the fall long before the greedy character does. They see the mistakes stacking, the arrogance escalating, the confidence twisting into desperation. What once appeared calculated now looks reckless. What once seemed controlled now feels chaotic. The antagonist starts making choices out of panic instead of strategy. They talk faster, gesture more, attempt to dominate conversations or manipulate outcomes with increasing intensity. Each action, meant to secure their advantage, instead exposes them further. Meanwhile, the truth-teller or protagonist doesn't need to push. They simply observe, respond calmly, and allow the greedy character to unravel themselves. Greed becomes its own trap, and the one who carries it steps directly into it. This is the moment the audience anticipates, the eruption, where all the hidden motives spill into the open. Maybe a slip of the tongue reveals too much. Maybe a hurried explanation contradicts an earlier claim. Maybe their attempt to cover one lie exposes 5 more. The more they scramble, the more transparent they become. The emotional resonance here lies in watching someone who believed they were untouchable fall victim to their own ambition. Greed promises power but delivers vulnerability. It offers confidence but breeds instability. And when that facade collapses, it does so dramatically. This turning point shifts the entire trajectory of the narrative. What once felt like an uphill battle for the protagonist becomes a downhill slide for the antagonist. The audience feels the momentum shift, the excitement, the satisfaction, the rush of justice finally beginning to surface. It's not just the revelation of deceit that captivates them. It's the poetic irony of watching greed betray itself. The antagonist's downfall isn't caused by an outside force, but by the very flaw they relied on to get ahead. This moment doesn't just advance the story, it transforms it, pushing the plot into the next stage where truth and accountability begin to dominate the scene. The moment hidden motives begin to push through the surface is the moment the energy in the story shifts from simmering tension to full emotional gravity. At first, these motives linger quietly in the background, disguised by charm, confidence, or carefully rehearsed behavior. The antagonist moves with a certain practiced fluidity, convinced their intentions remain concealed behind layers of manipulation, but motives, no matter how cleverly buried, have a way of revealing themselves when the pressure builds. A slight change in tone, an unexpected reaction, a detail spoken too quickly or too defensively, each one becomes a fracture in the facade. The viewer notices these micro-expressions long before the antagonist realizes they've exposed something. That is what creates emotional immersion. The audience becomes aware that truth is fighting to break through, inch by inch. With each new crack, the weight of the antagonist's intentions becomes heavier. Suddenly, their actions take on new meaning. The seemingly harmless remarks, the sidelong glances, the manipulative charm, they all gain context, reshaping the viewer's understanding. The protagonist may not yet grasp the full picture, but the audience does, and that imbalance generates powerful anticipation. They begin to see not just what the antagonist is doing, but why they're doing it, and the truth behind that why adds enormous emotional density to every scene. Hidden motives, once exposed, illuminate the darkness of the story in a way that viewers can't look away from. It's the moment when everything the antagonist worked so hard to hide begins to betray them. Their composure wavers. Their confidence becomes strained. The cleverness they once relied on now works against them, revealing patterns and inconsistencies they cannot control. What makes this moment so compelling is the inevitable vulnerability that creeps into the antagonist's behavior. They can feel the scrutiny tightening around them even if they don't fully understand why. Their attempts to maintain control grow increasingly frantic, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A sharper tone, a forced smile, a defensive explanation offered without being asked. Every attempt to maintain their disguise only deepens the exposure. Meanwhile, the protagonist's quiet observations add a kind of pressure the antagonist didn't anticipate. Integrity acts like a spotlight. The truth-teller doesn't have to do much. Their presence alone destabilizes the deception. As hidden motives sharpen into focus, viewers begin to sense the emotional stakes more clearly. They understand the cost of every lie, every manipulative action, every selfish choice the antagonist has made. The emotional weight doesn't simply come from the wrongdoer's downfall, it comes from the clarity of seeing who they truly are. It becomes a moment of recognition, the unveiling of intentions that fuel the conflict. The protagonist's resilience contrasts even more sharply against the antagonist's unraveling, enhancing the story's emotional pull. The audience feels a growing sense of justice beginning to stir, yet they also sense the pressure closing in on the antagonist. It's a mix of fear, anticipation, and satisfaction, all unfolding simultaneously. The story enters a phase where every movement carries intensity. Conversations grow sharper, not because of shouting, but because of what lies beneath each line. Silence becomes a weapon. A single look becomes a revelation. Even the environment seems to respond to the emotional charge, as though the air thickens around the truth struggling to break free. The antagonist begins to realize they are losing their grip, and this realization causes them to act in desperation, which exposes even more. Greed and deceit feed off secrecy, and when secrecy begins to crumble, they have nothing left to sustain them. The antagonist's motives, once hidden, now hang in the open, and the weight of them drags the story toward its next explosive transformation. A dramatic shift occurs when the once confident antagonist loses control. There is something undeniably gripping about watching someone who once commanded the room suddenly falter. The antagonist, who began with swagger and certainty, now finds themselves struggling to maintain even a fraction of the control they once wielded so easily. This shift doesn't happen instantly. It descends gradually, almost imperceptibly, until the moment becomes too clear to ignore. The signs appear first in the smallest ways: a hesitation before answering, a glance that betrays insecurity, a hand that fidgets with an object nearby. Each sign erodes the illusion of dominance they've built. Where confidence once lived, instability begins to seep in. The antagonist speaks with less clarity, choosing words too carefully or not carefully enough. Their reactions become sharper, more defensive. They accuse others too quickly, interrupt too often, try too hard to recover the power slipping through their fingers. The audience recognizes this unraveling with almost instinctive satisfaction because it marks the beginning of justice taking shape. It is the transformation they've been waiting to witness, the fall of someone who believed they were untouchable. What makes this shift so dramatic and emotionally potent is how sharply it contrasts with the antagonist's earlier persona. The same person who once moved with effortless arrogance now appears rattled, cornered by their own choices. Their behavior, once polished and controlled, becomes messy, inconsistent, reactive. They try to manipulate the narrative, but their attempts only expose their desperation. They try to intimidate, but their voice no longer carries authority. They attempt to regain composure, but the trembling beneath their surface betrays them. This loss of control is magnified by the presence of the truth-teller or protagonist. The calm, steady force that once challenged arrogance now becomes the grounding energy that makes the antagonist's unraveling even more pronounced. The protagonist's stability acts as a mirror reflecting the antagonist's chaos. Every moment the protagonist remains composed adds pressure. Every truthful statement becomes a blow the antagonist has no defense against. It is not force that dismantles them. It is truth, magnified by their own fear. As the antagonist spirals, the tension in the story thickens. Their decisions become erratic. Their lies become sloppy. Their attempts to cover their tracks become transparent. This loss of control doesn't simply expose who they are, it accelerates their downfall. The audience can feel the momentum shifting fully toward the protagonist, even if the antagonist is too overwhelmed to notice. There is a raw vulnerability in seeing someone who relied on dominance fall apart under the weight of their own actions. It speaks to a universal truth: arrogance has no armor when it meets accountability. The dramatic shift culminates in an emotional crescendo where the antagonist can no longer maintain their facade. They stand exposed, vulnerable, and utterly stripped of the power they once abused. This moment becomes a turning point not just in the plot, but in the emotional core of the story. Viewers feel the catharsis rising in the space where control used to be. They witness the collapse not as a moment of cruelty, but as the natural consequence of choices built on arrogance, deception, and greed. It is the beginning of the antagonist, facing the truth they worked so hard to outrun, and it drives the story toward the justice the audience has been waiting to see unfold. The tension heightens the moment the antagonist realizes the narrative is slipping away from their control, even though they desperately try to maintain their polished exterior. Their confidence begins to waver in subtle ways. An uneven breath, a sudden stiffness in their posture, a forced smile that no longer reaches their eyes. They sense the shift in the atmosphere, the way others in the room start to see through the cracks in their performance. What once felt like a stage built entirely for their advantage now feels unstable, as if the ground itself is tilting beneath them. The protagonist's calm presence intensifies this pressure, not through confrontation, but through unwavering steadiness. Each honest word, each unshaken reaction, becomes a mirror reflecting the antagonist's unraveling composure. The more the antagonist pushes to regain dominance, the more obvious their desperation becomes, and every attempt to redirect blame or manipulate emotion only exposes the truth they're trying to hide. Their voice tightens, their gestures sharpen, and the confidence they once wore like armor thins into something brittle and transparent, revealing the fear rising beneath the surface. As the emotional momentum shifts fully toward the protagonist, the antagonist grows increasingly frantic, trying to gather the fragments of power that are no longer theirs to hold. They speak faster, scramble for explanations, and cling to excuses that once worked flawlessly, but now fall flat under the weight of clarity. Their attempts to mask their intentions become tangled, each lie contradicting the last, creating a web they can no longer navigate. The audience senses the unraveling as a kind of poetic justice, not through spectacle, but through the quiet collapse of someone who built their confidence on falsehoods. Meanwhile, the protagonist's quiet resilience becomes a force the antagonist cannot overpower. Their stillness disrupts manipulation, their honesty slices through pretense, and their integrity becomes the very pressure that forces truth into the open. The antagonist, once fueled by arrogance, now trembles beneath the weight of their own actions, realizing too late that the power they flaunted was never truly theirs. Their facade, once impenetrable, fractures completely as the truth finally steps into full view. The emotional weight intensifies when the antagonist's final layer of confidence begins to crumble, not from external force but from the undeniable truth pressing in on all sides. Their eyes dart, searching for an escape that no longer exists, and the authority they once projected shrinks into uncertainty as their own words betray them. Every attempt to recover only deepens the cracks, revealing motives they worked so hard to conceal. In contrast, the protagonist's steady presence becomes a quiet anchor in the chaos, their calm demeanor highlighting the growing instability of the one who tried to overpower them. They don't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Their composure speaks louder than any confrontation. The room shifts toward them, drawn to the clarity and sincerity they carry, while the antagonist fades beneath the weight of consequences they can no longer outrun. The moment justice finally begins to surface carries a weight unlike anything else in the narrative. It doesn't arrive with explosions, grand theatrics, or exaggerated declarations. It arrives quietly, powerfully, like a tide that has been gathering strength beneath the surface long before anyone noticed the shift. The protagonist, who has carried truth with unwavering steadiness through every accusation, every attempt at manipulation, and every moment of pressure, stands at the threshold of vindication. Their voice is steady, not smug. Their posture is grounded, not triumphant. They are not fueled by revenge or ego, but by the simple desire for truth to be seen clearly, without distortion or distraction. This authenticity radiates through them, creating a contrast so striking that it becomes impossible for others to ignore. The room, once dominated by the antagonist's noise, now leans toward the quiet certainty of the protagonist's integrity. The antagonist feels this shift long before the final revelation arrives. Their confidence unravels in visible ways. Small hesitations creep into their speech. Cracks form in their forced composure, and the certainty they once carried starts to collapse under the weight of the truth pressing in. They glance toward others, waiting for the validation that once came freely but now remains out of reach. Their attempts to regain control become increasingly frantic, adjusting their story, raising their voice, insisting on interpretations that no longer align with the facts. Each effort exposes them further, making the divide between their constructed persona and the reality at hand impossible to bridge. What makes this moment so emotionally gripping is the balance between stillness and tension. The protagonist doesn't need to escalate. Their calm presence becomes more powerful than any outburst. They speak with clarity but without spite. They reveal facts but without embellishment. They embody the strength of someone who has carried the burden of truth for so long that they no longer need to fight. They simply need to stand. Quiet strength becomes a mirror reflecting the antagonist's collapse. Every inconsistency, every manipulation, every false narrative, forged in arrogance or greed, comes undone under the weight of undeniable evidence. As truth permeates the space, those who once hesitated now lean in, recognizing the authenticity that was always there. They watch as the scales begin to shift, not dramatically, but inevitably. The antagonist's reactions grow sharper, more desperate, as they grasp for threads that no longer hold. Their once fluid charm becomes disjointed, and the confidence they wielded like a weapon dulls into confusion. They realize, in a moment of almost painful clarity, that the power they believed they possessed was borrowed, sustained only by illusion, and now that illusion has shattered. The protagonist's resilience becomes the anchor for everyone witnessing the unraveling. Their honesty, once overshadowed by the antagonist's loudness, now becomes the strongest presence in the room. Each fact they speak carries weight. Each measured breath reinforces the stability they maintain throughout the turmoil. They have endured doubt, endured scrutiny, endured attempts to discredit them, yet none of it diminished their truth. Now, as clarity finally cuts through the noise, their patience becomes the quiet heroism at the center of the unfolding justice. The antagonist, unable to maintain the facade any longer, reveals through their own panic the guilt they once hid so skillfully. Their gestures become rigid, their eyes widen, and they search for someone to support their collapsing version of events. But the room no longer bends to their will. The shift has happened. The truth, once struggling to find space, now stands tall and unshakable. Nikolai Nikolov helps lifting both soldiers, but they are pulled from their feet by a woman who immediately becomes a man who could not possibly be, because the man is able to behold them. The protagonist, with their steady presence and unwavering integrity, becomes the embodiment of justice taking shape, step by step, without spectacle but with undeniable force. Keynote No. 12. The emotional climax nears its full height when accountability finally steps into the spotlight, not as a thunderous blow, but as a quiet, inescapable truth that wraps itself around every part of the moment. The antagonist, who has spent so much energy crafting illusions, projecting confidence, and manipulating perception, can no longer outrun the consequences resting at their doorstep. Their facade fractures in ways they cannot conceal. Each breath becomes shallow, each attempt to defend themselves more transparent than the last. The world they built on half-truths and inflated ego now stands exposed, its foundation crumbling under the weight of everything they tried to suppress. Meanwhile, the protagonist's presence becomes even more commanding, not loud or forceful, but profoundly steady. They do not gloat, do not revel in the antagonist's collapse. Instead, they continue to uphold truth with the same dignity they maintained from the beginning. Their strength lies not in the downfall of another, but in the validation of their own perseverance. They have carried the strain of doubt, endured moments when it seemed no one believed them, and faced challenges designed to break their resolve. Yet here they stand, not triumphant in arrogance, but grounded in quiet certainty. This balance of emotional poise against unraveling chaos creates a contrast that fuels the intensity of the scene. The antagonist, once convinced they held all the leverage, begins to confront the reality of their own choices. Their voice trembles, their arguments scatter, and their desperation becomes unmistakable. Each denial rings hollow. Each attempt to reclaim control falls flat. The more they try to manipulate the narrative, the more the truth tightens around them, exposing every inconsistency, every slip, every carefully hidden motive. Those witnessing the moment feel the shift as deeply as the characters themselves. The atmosphere changes, no longer clouded by confusion or uncertainty, but illuminated by clarity. People who once hesitated to choose a side now begin to see clearly. They feel the resonance of truth. They sense the sincerity in the protagonist's posture, in their calm gaze, in the way they stand without needing to dominate. They also recognize the fear trembling beneath the antagonist's surface, the fear that only arises when the mask can no longer be held in place. The emotional weight expands as the antagonist realizes they are standing alone, stripped of the authority or influence they once wielded. In their unraveling, they attempt to reach for explanations that no longer hold meaning. They blame circumstances, miscommunication, anything other than themselves. But accountability has a way of settling, slowly and firmly, making excuses look smaller with every attempt. Their struggle to maintain dignity becomes almost painful to watch, because it is clear that the truth has defeated them not through force, but through inevitability. The protagonist's steadiness becomes almost magnetic in this moment. They speak only when necessary, and when they do, Their words are measured and genuine. They don't need to raise their voice or assert dominance. The room listens because truth makes its own space. Their calmness is not cold, it's compassionate, knowing that justice doesn't require cruelty, only clarity. This keynote reaches its emotional depth when both characters stand in the aftermath of the revelation, the protagonist in quiet resilience, the antagonist in exposed vulnerability. The contrast between them defines the heart of the story, one who rose through integrity and one who fell through deceit. It is not a sensational downfall but a deeply human one. It is not a triumphant victory but a hard-earned resolution. The power of this moment resonates because it mirrors something universal, the undeniable force of truth when it refuses to be hidden, the courage required to stand firm in integrity, and the inevitable collapse of any structure built on manipulation. The protagonist's resolve becomes a symbol of what justice truly looks like when driven by sincerity rather than vengeance, and the antagonist's unraveling becomes a reminder that arrogance, greed, and deception may create temporary power, but they can never withstand the weight of accountability when the truth finally rises to the surface. From the A1 Storyteller channel comes a gripping narrative where arrogance collapses, truth rises, and justice unfolds with powerful emotional force. This story draws viewers into the intense struggle between quiet integrity and manipulative deceit, revealing how the calm strength of a truth-teller dismantles the facade of someone who believed themselves untouchable through unraveling lies, rising accountability, and the slow but inevitable triumph of honesty. This video delivers the kind of poetic justice audiences crave. Watch as greed exposes its own weakness, confidence shatters, and the antagonist's crafted illusions crumble under pressure. Experience the emotional crescendo as the protagonist stands firm, steady, and unshaken, allowing truth, not aggression, to deliver the final blow. Every moment builds toward a powerful realization: justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. It simply needs to stand. If you love stories where deception fails, arrogance breaks, and truth finally takes its rightful place in the spotlight, this A1 Storyteller episode is crafted for you. Stay until the end, because the final shift in power lands with unforgettable impact.